Hi everyone, and welcome back in this new episode of my podcast. We have not seen each other in really long. Matter of fact, last time I was on this episode, or last time I was on this podcast, I had longer hair. I chopped it off a little bit. So it is extremely odd to be back. I did have to review a little bit what I talked about in my previous episode in order to, not repeat myself and kind of bring new things on the table today. But I'm finally motivated again to record this. I'm going to try to be more consistent from now on. I just needed to step back into the habit of thinking about certain topics and then, just brainstorming it and transforming all of it into a podcast episode. I never use notes in order to film my podcast episodes, so that is the reason why sometimes it lacks a little bit of structure, and sometimes you could also feel like I'm just like going in every direction and I'm really struggling to make a point. But this time I have a few notes down because I do have to talk about certain topics that I've mentioned in the first part of this mini series about uni, the reality of university. So let's get started. But I hope everyone is well, and thank you so much for choosing to listen to this new episode. Again, I'm excited to be back. The first thing that I wanted to talk about that I find extremely hard in the educating system, but also I do not really know how we could make this a better thing. In Belgium, when you're 18, you basically have to choose what you want to do for the rest of your life. And perhaps this is a little bit drastic to say because I know that technically you're always allowed to begin again. As Barbie said in her song, you're always free to begin again. It is true, but it's also untrue because, in a way, you're given one chance to pick a degree and then you kind of have to stick with it. I'm not going to get into the details of how it works in Belgium, how the government finances our education, because matter of fact, we're actually quite lucky compared to countries around us. So education or higher education is actually quite accessible in Belgium. However, it comes to the cost that you kind of have only two chances to decide what you want to do. Basically, you're allowed to pick a degree first, and if you don't like it, you're allowed to reorient yourself. Is that how you say it? Reorient yourself once, and then that's it. That's all the government is going to finance for you. If you want to do more, then you have to pay out of your own pocket, which is really expensive. And it's not really something that we do in Belgium, anyways. And so at the age of 18, I had to decide what the hell is it that I want to do in life. Now, I know that in some countries, or even in Belgium, once you are around 14, 15, 16, you're kind of given the opportunity to specialize yourself into a certain area already. In Belgium, we call this technical studies, which are way more specific, way less general. But as someone who had no idea what I wanted to do at 16, I was like, I'm just going to follow the traditional path, stay in the common tree, and just, study general things. And so, I had the basics. So my main language, which is French, math, sciences, so chemistry, biology and physics, and history, geography, stuff like that. But nothing extremely specific, right? I did like major in math and sciences when I was in my last year of high school. So I kind of had, I guess you can compare it to the American AP, math AP. Sciences is like advanced, right, compared to the average, which is what led me to picking bioengineering as a bachelor's degree for what I wanted to study in university, because the way I pictured it was that, oh, it's engineering, so there's going to be a lot of math and physics and then bio, and I really like sciences or the more like biological side of sciences. So it's like, oh, this is perfect for me. Like this is basically the continuation of what I've studied in high school. And so I was like, it's going to be perfect for me. But once again, I was not really making a choice of studying bioengineering because of what it was, but just because I thought it's what makes sense for me after what I've studied in high school. But to be completely honest with you guys, this decision was made almost completely randomly. So, like, for the whole summer of 2019, because that was when I was supposed to make my decision in July, and half of August I had no idea what I wanted to do. I was like going to those big events where there's a bunch of schools or universities, or schools of higher education that just like present themselves and they tell you like, oh, this is what we teach at our school, this is what we specialize in. And I had a bunch of different ideas. I wanted to go into management, and then I wanted to go into a more scientific field. And then in the end, it was just my best friend who told me, I think I'm going to do bioengineering. And then I saw that it made a lot of sense, given what we studied in high school. And so it was like, you know what, me too. Girl, me too. But that is literally how I made my decision of studying that. I feel like perhaps, I don't know if it is me, because I was extremely privileged to grow up in an environment where I did not really have to ask myself a lot of questions about my future, because luckily enough, and I'm super grateful for that, I have a supportive family, and I know that my mom will always be there for me to care for me in case something goes wrong. So the idea of building my own future, working for my own future, has never been a massive priority. And I know, trust me, how lucky I am to be able to say that. But let's just say that if I compare myself to my mom, when I had to choose what I wanted to study in order to have a job later, I did not think like my whole life depends on this. You know, contrary to her, she immigrated from Vietnam when she was in her 20s, and she had to make a decision, and it was an important one. For me, given my reality and the luxury that I lived in, I did not see it as such. And so to me, it was a decision that I made extremely lightly, just because I was like suffering from success or from privilege, you could say. And so I have a bunch of friends actually that made their decision kind of like with the same state of mind. I have a friend who confessed to me recently. She already has her degree in civil engineering, and she specialized in informatics and management, in IT and management. She told me that she picked civil engineering just because she liked math a lot in high school, and because she didn't see herself in anything else. But you know, it was not a extremely well thought decision. And the reason why I'm saying all this is because I have struggled a lot with the thought that at 18 I had to make a decision that would basically define the next 5 or 7 years of my life. Unfortunately for me, because I was like not extremely well informed, I didn't pick the best university in Belgium in which you can do a bioengineering major. And so, to explain it shortly, bioengineering is like supposed to be the engineering. So, in case you do not know what this means, it means creating, innovating, basically. But in the biological field. So creating things among the living. So it's going to be a lot of things that have to do with genetics, with genes therapy, or it can also be work with bacterias, stuff like that. I honestly have not studied it long enough in order to give you a better explanation in this, but you just have to imagine that that is the idea of bioengineering. However, in my university, we do not have specific bioengineering courses. And so what they did is that they just took civil engineering classes, biology major classes, and they put it in our schedule. But we never really had something that was specific to our formation. And that led to situations where we had the most complicated and hardest courses from the civil engineering courses, and the hardest courses from the bachelors. And our whole schedule was basically filled with courses that were extremely hard, extremely challenging. And let's not even talk about my finals schedule. Like, we had a terrible final schedule because since those courses came from different department in my university, they never really spoke to each other in order to make a decent schedule to the student, like a study friendly schedule. And so we always had like exams right after another, and it was extremely hard to study for. So I did not have a good time. But just to say that besides having to make a decision of what I wanted to do in my life at 18, it was also really hard to just be in a degree that wasn't really taught well, if I'm being honest. And I now know that it wasn't taught well because I am now majoring in environmental management for a master's degree. And I have teachers and professors that are different than the kind of typical profiles that I've encountered in bioengineering. And I now can tell that these teachers back then just did not want us to pass classes, and I will never understand it because I feel like if I were to put myself in the shoes of a professor, I would take so much pride in seeing all of my students succeed, succeed. But apparently that was not the case for my teachers back then. They actually took a lot of pride in the amount of like the failing rates of their exam. They would always say stuff like, oh, like my exam is extremely feared among students because it is known to be hard. And I was like, the thing that I feel like they misunderstood a lot is that an exam being hard is not the same as an exam being stupid, which means that you can have a hard exam but still have the exam make sense to what the students have studied or what you taught in class. But a lot of my teachers, they didn't really try to evaluate whether we actually understood the class and the subjects that they were teaching. They were just trying to see who has studied the bottom, the what is it called, the footnote of this slide, which is completely stupid in my opinion because it does not show that you've understood the subject. It just showed that you were able to remember as much information as possible. And we know now, in this world that we live in, remembering information is not what matters. What matters is understanding how it works, whatever you're studying works. So I had a lot of frustration, and I think a lot of people are going to relate to this, but I was extremely frustrated to see that in order to get my degree, I basically had to study, but not understand what I was studying. And it was the same when I went to classes because I could tell that our professors that were teaching, they were not trying to teach. They were just giving a presentation as if they were talking to some colleagues of them that are working in the same field, to some researchers and experts, but they were not talking to students as if those people in front of them were students trying to learn about the topic. So in terms of actual education, I feel like my professors have failed me greatly in my bachelor's days. And that led to me going to lectures, but then eventually starting to give up on going to lectures because I just saw that it didn't matter. You know how like sometimes your parents or someone older than you is going to give you an advice and tell you you should attend your lectures because that's like 80% of your work and studying. Like if you attend lectures, you're sure to have already understood 80% of what you have to study. It is extremely false because this solely depends on the teacher that you have. If the teacher is not good at teaching, then it doesn't matter whether you go to the lecture or not. And so I would like slowly stop showing up to lectures and just stay home or go to the university library to study the materials on my own. And this created even more frustration on my end because I was asking myself, why is it that we are paying for education, or the government is financing our education just for us to basically teach ourselves? And I know that this is like a universal experience, but I will never understand. And if people are accepting that that is just a thing, then something's wrong, because that means that those professors are just paid to do nothing. Like they literally do nothing. They do not participate in our education. And thank God in Belgium, education is really affordable because, the government's financing it. But like imagine in other countries where you pay like thousands of euros for one semester and then that is the education that you're given. It's crazy to me, honestly. But yeah. Fortunately, not all professors are like that. I feel like it really depends on the kind of degree you're doing, because the degree that I'm doing right now, I can really tell that the teachers are they're putting a lot of effort into how they teach a class. And they're really trying, like they always tell us that the point is not to make us fail. The point is for us to have a degree at the end of all this. And I feel like if you have not been through this, you cannot imagine how crazy it is to hear that, because after years of spending my time with teachers that did not give a flip about me or whoever I was, which I do not ask that, honestly, because they have so many students. I understand that they cannot they cannot take it personally, take it upon them to care about each individual students. But I feel like they should still care about the class as a whole, which they don't. But now that I am in a master's degree with professors who care, it is extremely hard to realize it. I don't know how to explain this, but it feels unreal. I'm like, what do you mean you want me to succeed? Do you mean this? Like, I am extremely lucky, honestly, in the current degree that I'm doing, but I'm also extremely thankful that these professors are extremely, they do not put themselves up there. They know that we're all just humans, and that at the end of the day, if students are studying something, it's because they kind of want their degree and they kind of want to succeed. So they're not going to try to sabotage us. That is the word, sabotaging. That's what my bachelor's professors were doing to us. It's crazy, honestly. All this to say that for 5 years and a half, 6 years-ish, no, 5 years actually, I was stuck in a degree that I had come to realize that I actually hated. Basically, in order to be considered an actual bioengineer, so to have the engineer title, you have to do a master's. A bachelor's degree in bioengineering on its own does not have a lot of value in the eyes of companies or whoever your future employer will be. So I kind of had to do a master's in bioengineering if I wanted that title. But the more the years would go by and the more I would fail and the more frustration I would build within myself towards this freaking degree, the less I wanted to do the master's, and the more I was like, you know what, like I just want my bachelor's and then I want to I want to be done with this. Like, I really do not have it in me to do a master's in bioengineering as well, because I hate it. And the worst part of this all is that not only did I not feel like I learned anything in my 5 years in bioengineering, but also it was horrible sometimes to think back about a certain topic. And this happens to me a lot now that I'm done with it. I think back about certain classes, courses, and subjects that we've seen in class, and I think to myself, this could have been so interesting if the professors actually tried to teach it to us. And it made me extremely sad because, as I've mentioned in the first episode of this mini series, I really wanted to learn. Like, I love learning. I think it's like amazing to discover new things about the world, and how they work. But I just didn't learn anything. And this was so, like, it made me feel so miserable because not only was I stuck struggling to pass my classes in bioengineering, I was also just never feeling like all of it meant anything, because at the end of the day, it felt like I was not acquiring any skill, any knowledge, any nothing. I was just hammering information into my brain just to throw it all out on an exam sheet and then forget all about it the next day. But there was no skill that was built within those 5 years, and it makes me extremely sad, actually. So, yeah. And when I think back at it, I'm like, if only our teacher just took their time to make it interesting for us and to show us that whatever they were teaching us was actually interesting, then perhaps everything would have been different. But then again, I also have this thing where, like, since COVID happened during the second semester of my first year, sometimes I think, if it didn't happen, would I have stayed in bioengineering? Because the whole thing with COVID is that it made me think the reason why I do not enjoy my classes is because they are online. And since they are online, I am aware that the teachers cannot make it the greatest quality of education that they can. And so that must be why it is boring. That must be why I am not interested. Also, I am almost like not burnt out. I wasn't burnt out. I was never diagnosed with depression either, but I was almost dropping out of uni, basically. In French, we call it décrochage scolaire, which means that you're slowly but surely losing this link that you have with your school and with your education, and you're starting to drift away from it and you're losing all interest in it. That was what I was going through, basically. But I kept gaslighting myself and convincing myself that the reason why I was feeling this way was because of COVID and not because of the actual degree. Now, I always think about, like, perhaps if COVID never happened, then maybe I would never have continued in bioengineering. I would have reoriented myself elsewhere. But, there's no point in thinking about the what ifs, because it's in the past now. And fortunately, I'm way happier now, so it is fine. But sometimes it's a fun question to ask myself, because I'm like, there are so many possibilities, But anyways, just to say that now I am better. I'm doing my master's, and I do want to point out that even if at 18 and for 5 years afterwards, I felt like I was trapped in this degree, you're actually always free to do whatever the flip you want. It was extremely hard for me to make the decision of quitting bioengineering after I was done with my bachelor's, not pursuing it for a master's and just going for something else. It was kind of like, for a long time, I saw it as a failure because it meant I'll never be an engineer, And it was hard because that's kind of like what I studied for 5 years. But then I told myself that will never make me happy. I feel like sometimes you gotta ask yourself, why do you do things? And I think I've never actually stopped and think to myself, why do I think that a engineering title is going to make me happy? Obviously, we can all ignore the fact that an engineering title comes with money. But besides that, like, I was thinking, is that title and the money that comes with it really worth my mental health? Because it was eating me away. I was sick. I went to the hospital for like stomach issues that I had for the longest time. I also went through a little phase of IBS because the stress and the lifestyle that came with those studies were just like eating my body up, literally. In order to, like, I think I've mentioned it a little bit in the first episode of the podcast, but my days would look like wake up at 5:30, take a train at 6:30, be in class at 8 a.m., out of class at 6 p.m. So, and then like take the train back home. I'm home around 8 and I already have to go to bed at 10. But back then I was a little bit younger, so I was not extremely responsible with my sleep schedule. So usually I would go to bed way later than 10, perhaps 11 or midnight. And then I would, survive on 4 hours, 5 hours of sleep a night, which is highly inefficient in order to pay proper attention during lectures. And so I would always like fall asleep during lectures. Like I had the worst possible lifestyle, honestly. I slept all the time during lectures, and sometimes me and my best friend, we look at pictures of ourselves when we were like 18, between 18 and 20. And you just see it on our faces. We had like extremely tired and soulless eyes. We had like the biggest dark circles and eye bags, and it was, I don't even know how we did it. I don't think I could do it again today at this age. And I know it make it sound like I'm a granny or something, but I promise you I do not know where I found the energy to do all that. I also had a second problem in uni. I mean, I had a lot of problems in uni, but another thing that I really struggled with is that when I was a kid, when I was in high school, in elementary school, all that before higher education, I was a gifted kid. And now, if you know, you know. If you know, you know, because this is like the gifted kid curse. What is a gifted kid? A gifted kid, in my definition of it at least, from what I understand, because I've like been friends and I know many people who were gifted kids and then fell off later on in uni. But gifted kid is basically a kid that will understand, understand things that are taught in elementary and high school extremely fast. Basically, a gifted kid does not really have to study. I remember when I was in high school and before that, whenever there was a test or even an exam, so end of the year exam, finals, sort of, I would always study the day before. I had no specific study technique because back then, when the topics and the subjects were easy enough for my brain to understand extremely quick just after listening to the teacher, I did not have to study. And what I called studying the night before wasn't actually studying. It was just reviewing everything and then writing, like taking my written exam, and then forgetting about all of it right after, like as soon as the exam is done. And so this works really well as long as the amount of study materials is decent enough for a brain to understand or remember within one night of reviewing. And also so long as the topics aren't too challenging. But what most gifted kids experience in high school, sorry, what most gifted kids experience after high school is that they realize that what they were doing up until now was not studying. And now that they are facing harder topics, and way more topics as well, they actually have to study, but they have no idea how to do it. That was what happened to me. And so I found myself among all these people, some of them gifted kids like me, others just hardworking kids, and then some of them just like there. But it's just that hardworking kids, so the kids that were never really gifted, they didn't do the best in elementary or high school, but they did have a specific study technique because they knew that in order to pass the test, they would have to study regularly. Those people actually will do good in uni. So if you're like under the age of 18, or if you're about to enroll into uni and you're like that, like you're someone who works regularly, you will be fine. If you're a gifted kid like me, start thinking about a study technique because it's gonna get real tough. Unfortunately, it was a real shock for me to realize that the head of the class, or I was not always head of the class in my uni. I mean, it's in my uni, in my high school. I don't even know if the term is head of the class or just like top. Yeah, top of the class. I was not always top of the class, but I was always at the top. And it was extremely hard for me to realize that this does not matter at all in uni because I don't have a proper study method. And there is also the factor that once, like, education is mandatory until you're 18. Uni is optional. And so the people who actually decide to go to uni are already people, I think, who have a tendency to, that it's already people who think that they will be able to study, because that's what uni is. It's a lot of studying. At least in Belgium, you don't have a lot of like practical types of learning. It's a lot of studying and a lot of theoretical concepts, which can be highly criticized as well. Perhaps I will talk about it one day in this podcast, but it can be criticized that you do not really, it's really, in my opinion, it's extremely detached from the actual reality of the world. I came to uni realizing from, like, basically I went from in high school being glazed by all of my teachers because they were always telling my parents like, oh, Thien will do great. In anything she wants in life, she will do great because she's a great student. She's a great pupil. She has amazing marks and amazing grades, so she can do whatever she wants. And I was convinced by that, by the glaze. And I appreciate, honestly, I appreciate their support because, you know, I felt extremely like I cannot lie, I liked being praised by my teachers because it made me feel like, you know, to me it was like it's a sign that I'm doing good and I'm worthy. That's another story. But yes, so when I came to uni among people who chose a specific degree that is highly demanding in sciences and in math and in physics, and who are also people who already knew that they were okay with studying. And, you know, it's kind of like you're gonna have to see it as a sorting tool. And we were getting out of that sorting tool. So basically, when I was on my first year of bioengineering in university, I was among people who were already perhaps good at math and sciences because that's why they chose bioengineering, because they know that they have a certain level of skill and understanding in it. and then they chose uni, so they already know how to study. Obviously, this is generalizing, of course. I'm also like kind of like just talking about the people who did better than me, but there were also people in my situation, of course. But what I'm trying to say with all this is that basically I went from being top of the class to being extremely average, if not under average in my degree in uni. And this is going to sound extremely like I have an inflated ego, but that's kind of what I had, honestly. Like, if I'm gonna be completely honest and transparent with you guys on this podcast, I had an inflated ego because of what I've been told in high school. Like, I was top student or among the top students. And so in my head, I was like, oh, yes, of course, I'm going to do great. And then when I realized that I was not going to do great and I was pretty average, it was an extreme shock for me, because for the first time in my life, I was no longer special. And it may sound extremely, as I said, like, oh, like you have such a big ego, like who the hell are you? But that's how it felt. I was like, oh, I thought I was special, but actually I'm just average. And when I talk about this to people who don't go to uni, they always tell me, they give me a little reality check, honestly, because they're like, but you don't realize that being in uni is already like not given to everyone. It's already special to be able to have the privilege to attend uni and receive education in uni. And I completely agree with them. But in the reality that I was living, and I think that this is an extremely important thing when you're trying to understand someone's take on something, it's always important to put yourself in their shoes and understand that whatever take that they have on life highly depends on what they've lived and the reality that they know. And so my reality was, I was top student in a really decent school in high school. And then I went to a good university and I was average as hell. And that hurt my ego. Basically, the way it felt for me was like I was lied to. And it is like, looking back, you can tell yourself that I could only blame myself, because obviously, how am I supposed to be special if I'm not putting the work in? Like, I was like, I don't know exactly what went through my head, like at that time, like what's the psychology behind all of my reasoning, but I really felt like I had been betrayed by everyone who told me that I was special and I was like extremely smart, because uni no longer made me feel smart. When I was like younger than 18, my whole personality, or a big part of my personality was I'm the good student. It was something that I was extremely attached to because it was something that I did well. I was not good at sports. I was not like the person that you can pick in your team and you're gonna win a team sport. So I was like, one thing that I can do well is I can study well, like I can be a good student. But then in uni, that got taken away from me because, I realized that that's not how it works. And that hurts. It hurt a lot. And it like split something in me. Now I'm way better. Like, now I'm fine with it. But back then I was like also like a big perfectionist. And so I always wanted things to be neat and good. And I was never okay with submitting something that was just okay. Like, if I was submitting any type of work or writing an exam, it had to be perfect. And gradually, as the years went by, I started to be okay with submitting things that are like low-key mid or almost bad, because I was like, we do not have time to sweat over this anymore. But back then, it was extremely hard for me to no longer be a good student. Like, it hurt because it was my whole personality, and now it was taken away from me. So I also kind of went through a big like personality crisis, which I haven't really thought about before recording this podcast. So perhaps we can talk about this in another podcast episode. But past the age of 18, I went through a lot, and I still do, honestly. I'm almost 25 now, guys, but I still do go through um identity crisis every now and then. And sometimes I really wonder, like, what am I? Who am I? But I think perhaps it's kind of like something you do your entire life. You will spend your entire life asking yourself who you are and what you like and what your purpose is, if there is any. It reminds me of a question that my cousin asked me yesterday. This is unrelated to uni, but I just want to talk about this because I'm thinking about it right now. She asked me, at which point do you think that you will have made it in life, in terms of like, when will you sit with yourself and tell yourself, I've made it, I have succeeded in life? And I straight up told her, never. Not because I think I will never be satisfied with my life, but because the thought of having one single purpose and then finally reaching it scares me. Because when I reach it, once I reach it, what then? Does this mean that there's no longer a purpose to follow in my life, to seek, to pursue in my life? You know what I mean? So it was something that was a little bit scary. Like, I told her that I prefer to think that I will never be done learning, seeking myself, trying to understand myself and understand life, because I think it's just funnier this way, to think that it's just like there's no, oh, I know what this reminds me of. There's no end goal if the goal is the experience. It's a quote that has been trending on social media lately, and I think it's so smart, because then if the goal is the journey, then you always win. And I love that. But yes, I guess I wanted to talk about the fact that I fell off in uni, and it was extremely hard for me to accept. And I think it explains, sorry about the Discord notification, and I think it explains a lot of why I started struggling with failure, and also why I couldn't let go of this degree. Because as I explained at the beginning of this podcast, you're kind of given two chances. You can enroll in one degree. If you don't like it, you can enroll in the second one, and that's your final decision, sort of. But I did not want to let go. I did not want to. It was extremely hard for me to tell myself that stopping this degree, making the decision to go elsewhere, was not failing, because that was also something that I was struggling with. Up until I was 18, I had never failed anything in my life, because gifted kid, right? But then the idea of giving something up felt like I was failing, not only me, but my entire family and my entire like close circle as well, because for some reason I thought that everyone expected me to do well. But so like I just couldn't. And if I had to go back, and if I had to counsel my 18-year-old self or 20-year-old self, I would honestly tell her, girl, just go for another degree. You'll be happier. I'm not saying that I regret finishing my bachelor's degree, because it gave me access to the current master's that I'm doing. And that one I'm really grateful for, because I'm actually enjoying. But I feel like I would just go back and tell her that giving up on a degree is not failing, it's just redirection. And I think I've talked about this in a podcast, but I don't really believe in failing things. I just think that sometimes you need to stop gripping onto things that aren't meant for you, and you just have to let go. Because when you let go, like, okay, let's picture it like that. If I'm holding a bouquet in my hand, beautiful flowers over here, if I'm holding a bouquet, I can't hold anything else because my hands are busy. And how are you supposed to welcome things that are meant for you in your life if you're so busy holding onto something that is not meant for you, but also that is just taking space in your hand and making you unable to hold on to anything else? You know, I think it's something like, oh, I keep hitting this. I'm sorry. I hope it does not. I hope you don't hear it in the podcast. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is you cannot have everything you want on your table. Like, if this table is your life, if you clutter it with shit that is not meant for you, you will never have space for the things that you actually want or that are actually meant for you. So please do not be afraid to throw shit in the trash so that you can clear up your table and welcome things that are actually meant to be and that will actually make you happy. Okay, I feel like this episode went a little bit in every direction. Not really sure what the point was of this whole discussion. I hope you just enjoyed my yap, honestly, because I feel like it was a little bit too unstructured and I really apologize for this. But, you know, that's why the podcast is called Yappity Thien, because it's just yapping, honestly. There's no like beginning or end to it. But yes, I will definitely make an episode 3 about the reality of universities, because I also want to talk about the idea that is sold to all of us about university. You're gonna make friends, you're gonna party, you're going to have so much fun, it's the best years of your life. Do not lie to me. I will not sit here and lie to you like that, because that is the reality of some people, but not everyone's reality in uni. University can be extremely lonely, and I think that's the topic I will talk about in the next episode, if I remember it. I will remember it, because I will try to record the next episode soon, so that, you know, I'm in this little inspired and yapping mood. Okay. Now, I do not know what time it is, but I do think that I have to go to school soon. So I'm going to wrap it up now. Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. I hope you enjoyed it, even though it went in every possible direction. It's a sunny day today, which is unexpected. It was supposed to be cloudy, but I'm really thankful, and I wish you a really good rest of your night, of your day. Thank you again for listening. I'll see you guys soon. And yes, let me know what you thought of this podcast and if you related to anything I said. If you don't, I am glad. Okay, bye bye.